Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Outer Sounds. I'm here today with Rafael Toral. He's a Portuguese musician, and we're here to talk about Nuno Canavarro's Plux Quba LP, which is the Outer Sounds selection for March. Really excited to talk to Rafael about this incredible record, and we're gonna just get into it and talk about. So I guess the first thing I wanted to ask was, how did you first discover this album or Nuno's music?
Hello, thank you for having me and talking about this really amazing record. Well, if I recall well, Nuno spent some time in the Netherlands, in The Hague, in the place called the Institute of Sonology. So he could study like some advanced techniques and both technologically and compositionally. And he spent some time there, and he came back full of ideas. And eventually he had a concert at this venue, and I was fortunate to attend that concert.
Oh, nice.
And all of my friends were there, including the guy who was the head of the label that put out the album after.
Okay.
So we were all struck by that music because we were kind of listening to Bauhaus and stuff like that. This was 87, I guess. Yeah. 86 or 87. And and we were like, well, this is not quite our cup of tea, but it's really interesting. What is this? I think none of us had heard something like that before. So this guy João Pest, who ran the Amorramenta label, approached him, and he was also excited about the music and proposed to release it, which I found it very brave and odd, because the label was mostly releasing, post-punk bands who were listening to these, to these 80s bands. And eventually later on I met Nuno, and he gave me a cassette with the album, with the full album, just as we know it now. But it turned out that for the guy who was doing the cut for the album at the time, that he couldn't fit all of the tracks in the available space. So the official release came out with 3 tracks less. So for the reissue, they did a better job at including all the tracks in.
Oh, no. Yeah.
But I had this tape with the full selection, which nobody had. And for many years it was, I played that tape over and over.
Right. This is probably before you could like digitize it or something like that, right?
Yeah. There was no. Yeah, I just got my first computer with the digital technology. Well, actually, not that much later on, but I was still using tapes for listening to music, cassette tapes. And I didn't have a turntable, so I had the record, but I never played it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how I eventually met Nuno a few times, and he was fascinating to chat with. I was like 19 or 20 at the time, and he had this way of being and talking, where uh, he would quickly offer a different angle of view from whatever was being discussed.
Yeah.
And that was fascinating. And I was like, whoa, I never thought of that. But yeah, that's how I first came across with it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. Was Nuno like involved with was this all happening in Lisbon, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So was he involved with like the music scene before this, or did he kind of just like come out of nowhere with this like incredible record after going to the Institute of Sonology?
Well, he was involved with kind of the previous scene.
Mm-hmm.
So that there was quite a counter-cultural thread running among all of us who were listening to to these post-punk bands and some industrial music, and
Yeah.
and before that there was this was not that long after the revolution in Portugal, which was in 74. So there was a fascist regime up to
Yeah.
then.
Yeah.
And nothing was happening. So there was no information, so there was a slow process of discovering things and finding out new spaces. So there was a kind of around 1980, 79, 80, there was a boom of rock bands, Portuguese rock bands.
Okay.
So-called Portuguese rock. So Nuno was keyboard player in one of these bands.
Mm.
And yeah, I don't know if the band split. Yeah, they weren't doing anything at all. So this was like 81, 82. They did some singles. I think they did an album. And yeah, Nuno got far away from that by the time he came up with this music.
Do you have like any insights about how he made this record? The only thing that I've read about is that he had like he used like an early Ensoniq sampler and like an 8-track, tape machine or something. But the sounds on the record are so so incredible and mysterious and fresh, and sometimes you can't tell what the sources are, and there's little bits of things from all over the place. And have you learned anything about how the record was like crafted and put together?
Not really. I don't think I had met him personally while he was making the record, or he probably had most of the material already laid out by the time he showed up with this concert.
Yeah.
There's some some instruments I can tell what is sampled and what is played, although he was very keen on playing things instead of programming.
Okay, so not much like MIDI or anything like that.
I think he used a fair amount of MIDI, but like there's a track where there's this fast kind of bouncing notes, and they don't, the tempo is kind of irregular in a way. It's kind of unstable. And I think he played manually, and and was listening like into tracks and bouncing off each other, and accumulating like time discrepancies, and it made it elastic in a very organic way. And there's another track that there's a woman's voice that I recognize as being his girlfriend at the time, and they were discussing, whatever, there was a kind of a kitchen sound. So, and he would talk about his interest in making music with sounds that are ugly in a way, like a machine that is half machine, half toy, that makes a noise. And there's some of that spirit that you can hear in the record.
Yeah.
But I don't know much more other than that he had a tape machine and this Mirage sampler.
Yeah, because obviously, like, I think the album, it sounds so fresh still today, and I think it's like, it's interesting because it's sort of like he was using kind of electroacoustic, musique concrète kind of ideas to make the album, but the like sonic material that is on the album is very it's like playful and mysterious, and it's also like melodic, and it has like more tonal harmony. So he didn't kind of fall into like the more typical like kind of academic electronic music world. It's such a kind of personal intimate language that he developed.
But it sounds like he meant it to be accessible and not too heady.
Yeah.
So that a listener could hear it as an experience.
Yeah.
And load it with I don't know, memories or familiar sounds or and I never really inquired about how the record was made because I enjoyed the mystery so much.
Yeah, I bet.
I even when I met Nuno, I never asked him anything. How did you do this or that?
Yeah.
Because it was so otherworldly in a way that it's not supposed to exist. Like it's hard to realize where it comes from.
Right. Right.
It doesn't make sense. I don't know if some music that you hear, you can tell what it is or where it comes from or what it's about.
Right.
And that record is so I don't know. It's words fail me. It's otherworldly in a way that you couldn't guess that something like that could come into existence.
Right.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Because there's no there's no reference points to see it coming.
Yeah, it's very singular for sure. Yeah. So when the label that put it out, Ama Romanta, I think is the name, right?
Mm-hmm.
They, like you said, they were kind of taking a bit of a risk or a chance to put out this, pretty different record from the other types of things that they released, right? What was there any like kind of local reception for the album when it came out, or did it just kind of come and go and was important in a small group of people or something?
Can't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there was a lot of coverage or that it made a big splash in a broader sense.
Mm-hmm.
But among the community, it was really fascinating to discover it.
Yeah. So I was emailing a little bit with Jim ORourke, and I want to talk about his involvement with like the reissue and stuff. But one of the first things he told me to ask you about the label, but he said, he was like, you got to check out the Ferreira record,
Oh yes,
which I guess was released right before Plux Quba on the label. So it seemed like,
either yeah, in the same batch
yeah, it was
basically.
like right around the same year or something. So interesting
Hmm.
that maybe that was kind of like set the table for this album, or was like a another kind of departure for them to release as well.
No, they came out pretty much
Right
at the
around.
same time,
Yeah.
and like the catalog numbers are consecutive
Right.
between those two,
Hmm.
and they were. My impression was that they were released like either at the same time or within a month of difference. So for me, it was like a single event
Yeah.
that these two records came out. This other record is really, really out there. It's it doesn't sound as accessible and playful as
Right.
Plux Cuba, but it's pretty much as mysterious and and also has the same even more this character of coming out of nowhere.
Yeah.
You wouldn't know where it's coming from. Well, now I can trace its references a bit more easily because it has more ties with the academic electronic music culture.
Okay.
But being mostly computer music from the mid 80s,
Yeah.
it was very specific. It was computer music was not very common, especially in Portugal. It wasn't very widespread as a practice. And yeah, and Tose's choices of sounds and um, the shapes of his pieces,
Hmm.
and especially the titles, are really mind-boggling.
Yeah.
That record for me is even more mysterious than Plux Cuba.
Yeah.
It's really, really amazing.
Yeah. When when Jim told me about it, I went and ordered a copy. I was able to track down a copy on on Discogs. So that's currently on the way to me, and I can't wait. I listened to
Oh wow.
some samples online of it, and I was just like, yeah, I want to get a copy of this. So I have a copy of the record that's on its way to me now. So I can't wait
All right.
to spend time
Congratulations.
with it. Yeah. Yeah. It was.
There's been a CD reissue,
Oh yeah.
and it's probably on Bandcamp.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And there's like the liner notes in the CD disclose some of the process, and it just kind of spoiled it when I got the CD because there
Yeah.
was the same. I was enjoying the mystery so much,
Yeah.
like not really knowing, how that thing came into existence.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel the same way. There's certain things you don't want to know how it was made or the process, because it just
Yeah.
it almost like it replaces your own imagination with something else, a different story or a different ideas. And the great thing about kind of these beautiful mysterious records is that you can have your own sort of world of experience and imagination with it, and it just becomes that much more special. But so after Plux Cuba came out, Nuno did another album a couple years later with Carlos Maria Trinidad. It's almost like it's kind of like a split album.
Yes.
Called Mr. Walu Galu. And that album's like pretty good, but it's just like it doesn't quite have the the same
I know.
magic, yeah, as Plux.
Yeah.
So
He did.
yeah, I was gonna say, do you know anything about that album? And then after that, after that album came out, we don't hear anything, more from him.
Yeah, I by the time the reissue came out, I tried really hard to persuade him to come up with some kind of follow-up, or
Yeah.
at least to show up and play, because he would be there was he was much in demand.
Yeah.
So whatever he did, if he did anything, would have been well received.
Right.
And he was very reluctant, and I was like uncomfortable with his with the stuff he was using. So he wasn't using tape anymore. He had like this keyboard workstation, and he was like working with it, but he was never quite satisfied with what he was doing. So I never got him to do anything, and he turned to making both video and music for film.
Okay.
I don't know. I haven't spoke to him in like probably 10 years or so. And but he showed me a soundtrack for a movie that he had made, which pretty much like this other record didn't relate to Plux Quba so closely,
Yeah.
but still had some interesting moments that you could hear as his.
Yeah.
You could recognize his sound. But that's about it.
Yeah.
I never heard anything from him, or and didn't hear of him doing anything else. He's a very strange character. Very nice.
Yeah.
Very very enjoyable to chat with. But he has this kind of it's not quite low profile, but he has this way of not really being satisfied or with what he's working on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if he sets very high standards for himself, or whatever, I don't know what's happening with him, so that he's not so comfortable about just doing something and release it. It doesn't seem to be an easy relationship with his own output.
Yeah. I think some artists are like that. They have a hard time finishing things, or just maybe are reluctant to, like put it out into the world if they don't feel, super confident in it or something like that. So when did you meet, I want to talk about how like the reissue happened, but when did you first meet Jim ORourke? And I guess he apparently had heard about the album through Christoph Heeman, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the first time I knew about Jim, I was visiting Phil Block in New York, and he always had these piles of CDs that people sent him.
Yeah.
And I was working with guitar and doing this drone music, and at that time I still didn't have email, and the widespread use of the internet was not very common yet.
This was like probably in like the mid 90s or something.
It was 93, 94 maybe.
Yeah.
And so Phil had a copy of Remove the Need, and I picked it up and looked at it and played it, and thought, wow, this guy is working in a field that is really close to what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So I felt he was like a kind of a twin soul. Although Remove the Need was quite different from what I was doing, but it was the form and the materials were much closer from what I was working with. So I found a way to get in touch with him and wrote him a letter. That's that time you would still write letters.
Yeah.
Later on, we started communicating with fax. And we arranged that I would come over to Chicago on my next trip to the States, which was in '95. And we got along really well. He's an amazing guy, of course.
Yeah.
And we played together, and actually we premiered Phil Niblock's guitar piece in Chicago, either in '95 or '96. And we would play it together a few times live. Yeah, that's how I first met him.
And then he had the Moikai label, and did he put out your Wavefield?
Yes,
right.
He had this other label called Dexter Cigar.
Right. Yeah.
Which was with David Grubbs.
Yeah, that's right.
And he put out Wavefield on that label, and only later, by 2000 or something, or 90,
late 90s.
Yeah, 1998 or
yeah,
around that time. He released Soundbody on Moikai.
Right.
And then later on, Drag City which was the mother label.
Yeah.
For those labels that were, the labels were like subsidiaries to Drag City. Right. They would handle manufacturing and distribution and so on.
Did you propose, to Jim to do the reissue for Plux Quba, the CD reissue?
No, he apparently, after he first heard this record in Germany, he emailed me almost in panic, like, do you know this guy?
Yeah.
I heard this Plux Quba record. I want to release it really badly. Can you help? Or he was like, but he had a kind of a desperate tone in the email. And I know him. I know that record for like 10 years or so.
Yeah.
And so I got the job to trace where the tapes were, and transfer to digital. So I finally located the tapes, and but I didn't know about tape baking at the time.
Oh, okay.
So for people who are watching, tape baking is a technique where you get old tapes, they get some moisture, and the metal particles don't bond to the tape so well.
Yeah.
So the tape has to dry so that it's restored, and I didn't know that at the time. So when I put the tape in a tape recorder and play it, every 2 minutes the guides and the head were full of oxide from the tape. And I would stop it and clean everything, clean all the guides while still recording to that tape.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, what's happening? The tape is like falling apart. It's losing all the layer of oxide. And so every 2 or 3 minutes I would stop the tape to clean everything. and later on I spliced. I dumped that recording in the computer and sliced all these stops, cleaning stops, sliced it all back together, so that it would be in one piece again.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was very stressful.
I bet. Yeah.
But yeah, at least the sound was there.
Yeah.
And I made sure that the edits I made were according to how the tape sounded, because I knew those
Right.
tracks so well from listening to them for years. And yeah, so that was and then I sent out that tape to Jim.
Yeah, that's great, and that's how I first heard of this album. I think I bought that CD that came out. I mean, probably I think the CD came out in Moikai in like 1998 or somewhere in there, but I think I bought it maybe a few years after that, and you know, like everyone else, was just like blown away and you know, super just obsessed with this album. The thing that when that album was reissued, it came out at a time when there was kind of some contemporary music that sounded similar. You know, I think about like you know, some of like Nobukazu Takamura's music, or like Microstoria, these kind of like quiet, playful, you know, melodic sounding electronic music. So it's kind of amazing. It's sort of like, you know, like you said, it was an album that was made, you know, 10 years earlier, but it almost like fit into the landscape of some of the electronic music that was happening at the time, you know.
Actually, I think from what I heard, not only from Jim, this record made quite a splash in the Cologne scene.
That makes sense. Yeah.
In the late 90s.
Yeah.
And it somehow became influential. So
yeah,
some of those things that you hear are probably ripples of the impact of the album had in those scenes. I don't know so much in Japan.
Yeah.
Maybe Takemura's inspiration comes from somewhere else.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't know, because we never talked, or
yeah, you never know how these like influences you.
Yeah, I never really made that connection. But I see what you mean.
Yeah, I just sort of like was hearing that, you know, at the time, and then now when I listen to the album again, I kind of hear that influence, whether it was actually, you know, there or direct or not, but it sounds like some of the things that were happening during that time. But yeah, what I mean, just kind of like wrapping up, like, what do you think what's the legacy of this album, or what, you know, just how do you think people will you know, see this album or discover it, you know, going forward?
Well, it's probably more influential that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
Which is normal. When something makes a splash, it sends waves that you never know where those waves are going to reach, and what effect it's going to have in time. Well, I don't know. I think it remains a very unique object, and it remains a fascinating and enveloping experience to listen to.
Yeah.
It's like one could say, if you like music, you will like this album.
Yeah, for sure.
uh, Otherwise, I don't know. It's I've heard subsequent music made by other people where I can, you know, hear echoes of this record. So maybe it inspired some notion of playfulness and immediacy,
Yeah,
as opposed to a more heady approach, and and uh, and at somehow at odds with this modernist conception
yeah,
of cultural progress, in which things have to be ugly, and uh, you have to have an iconoclast attitude towards everything, and you know,
mhm,
question and dismantle, and have some kind of destructive action in some way, which is pretty much a paradigm that was very prevalent in the 20th century. That you don't want to make pretty stuff. You
yeah,
have to,
right.
it has to be abrasive and ugly, and revolutionary, and you know, and it doesn't really have to be that way. At least, you know, it's it's quite past the time to get over that mindset, and that way of understanding creation.
Yeah,
Um, I think it's a very good um, way. Nuno's album is a very good way to suggest that one doesn't need to be afraid of beauty,
yeah,
and of being positive, of being creative in a way that is not angry, that is not, you know, trying to bring something down,
hmm,
or smashing anything, or ripping anything apart. It's just it can just be something to enjoy, um, and be um, in a kind of peace, in a kind of joyful peace.
yeah,
Although even as it is, you know, a radical departure from, you know, everything you know, into this very peculiar space. But yeah, I think it's probably the strongest message it sent out is probably that that one doesn't need to be um, doesn't need to make ugly music to be creative or original or whatever.
yeah. I think that's really well said, and it's one of those albums that, you know, I know I've listened to it hundreds of times, and it's just, it never gets old for me, you know, and that's always,
Mm,
for me, that's always a sign of a great record. You know, you can listen to it over and over again, and I'm always discovering new details and hearing new little things, and it's just it's a world that I love to like keep revisiting, you know. So
mm.
um so yeah, thank you for, you know, for sharing your stories about this album, and I want to thank Drag City for keeping it in print. They've reissued the LP a couple times, and they just
Mm.
repressed the LP recently, so that's why we're doing it as part of the Outer Sounds, you know, vinyl subscription. And yeah, you know, thanks for
That's
chatting with
great
me.
news.
Yeah, and
Um,
also, oh, I was going to say also, everyone should check out Rafael Toral's music as well. His music is incredible, and you know, also a great musician in his own right. So yeah, thanks for chatting with me, Rafael. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure to contribute.
Yeah.